This podcast is part of the Global Sports Podcast Network, the only network bringing you exclusive daily news and views on your Premier League team, the Premier League, women's football, and fantasy football. A unique listening experience that puts fans first, bringing you the very latest breaking news from your team. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make us your first listen every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network. Every club, every day.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Daily English Premier League podcast brought to you by the Global Sports Podcast Network. It's just me today, Nick, and I will be doing our Friday forecast, where we'll look at all the action in the Premier League this weekend. Starting off, gonna just go through sort of the Europa Conference League race. I think it's something not sort of being overshadowed by the Champions League at the moment, and a lot of the Saturday games, especially the 3 p.m s, are relating to that. So you got Fulham, who are in 11th against Everton. Ipswich play Brentford, who are 9th. Wolves play Brighton, who are 10th, and then the 5:30 TV game, only TV game on Saturday, is Bournemouth in 8th, leading that race for the Conference League against Villa, who are obviously on the outskirts of the Champions League race. They're in it, but they're definitely the worst placed team in that at the moment. So looking at these games, you've got Bournemouth, like I say, leading that race on 53 points, playing Villa, have the hardest game of the 4 teams in the race this weekend. Then you have Brentford on 52 points, Brighton on 52 points, and Fulham on 51 points. And just to clarify, the 8th place will get Conference League should City win the FA Cup, which I think most people are expecting them to. I'd love if Crystal Palace can upset a team that wins every year, no matter how bad they are. And Newcastle also need to get top 7, which I believe is already confirmed. So it's more than likely 8th place will get Europa Conference League football this year. And obviously, I'll start with Fulham and Everton. Everton obviously went on that strong run to pull them away from a relegation fight this year. And then it feels like I've not heard from them for weeks. And when I was preparing for this episode, they've won once in their last 10 games with 6 draws and 3 losses. So like much of the league, they are beached at the moment. And Fulham, who are a bit of a weird team, they'll just randomly have terrible results against relegation candidates. Like we saw recently, I believe it was against Southampton, that they needed a last-second winner to not give Southampton that extra point to eclipse Derby's record. So Fulham, this could be a weird one, but they're at home. You would expect them to win. So they need to win if they want to return to Europe for the first time since, I believe, the Roy Hodgson days, when they obviously reached a Europa League final. Brentford are one of the teams I'd really like to get European football. For me, it's Brentford and Bournemouth, I think, are really deserving of European football after the work they've put in. Obviously, Brighton have done similar things and already had European football, so I'm less inclined to see them in European football next year. But Brentford, especially if they were to somehow keep Mbeumo and Wissa and potentially add to that, it would be incredible to see that in European football. And I think their fans deserve it. I think their strategies to get to the Premier League, stay in the Premier League, which we've seen is so difficult in the past few years, deserve some European football at the G-Tech Stadium. I think it'd be quite fun. So they're away to Ipswich this weekend. You'd expect them to win. And then similarly, Wolves against Brighton. Obviously, Wolves are on a really strong run at the moment. They pulled themselves well away from relegation and are now in 13th. And whereas Brighton are 10th, got a big point last weekend against Newcastle. And this could be one where Brighton slip up. They've been a bit of a weird team this year, seem to lack consistency. So I could see Brighton slipping up here, to be honest. And then finally, Bournemouth versus Villa, like I was saying, definitely the hardest game out of any of these four teams. And I mean, Bournemouth are at home. Villa are trying to do all they can to get into Champions League. I think they're going to end up having to settle for Europa League next year. But this is a massive game for both teams, which is rare this season at this stage of the season where both teams actually have something to play for. So I think this could be one of the games of the weekend. Obviously, two very strong tactical styles from both managers. Iraola's high pressing, and compared to Emery's sort of aggressive mid blocks, especially when he plays my team Arsenal. So it'll be interesting to see this game at the weekend. If I was to pick the team that will get out of this Champions Conference League race, sorry, I have it written down as ECL, so I keep reading it as European Champions League. That's my own error. Bournemouth, if I go through the final three games for each of these teams, obviously you've already heard me say who they have this weekend. But Bournemouth, who are, like I say, 53 points, have a point lead over Brentford and Brighton and 2 point lead over Fulham in this race. Have Villa this weekend, then Manchester City next week. So they've been given a bit of a gauntlet. Obviously, you had to play Arsenal last week and did win in the against the team in second place. And then last game of the season, they have Leicester. So if they can get through the next 2 weeks, probably with like 4 points, they're in a pretty strong position, I reckon, going into the last game against Leicester, which you'd expect them to win. Looking at Brentford, they got Ipswich this week, and then a massive game in this race against Fulham next weekend, which could be pivotal because they then have Wolves on the last day. And you'd think if they've won against Ipswich and won against Fulham, they'll be ahead of Bournemouth if my prediction is right. When it's more than likely that Bournemouth will lose against Man City, but this is what I'm saying. It's going to be so close. All of these have really interesting and they all have a difficult game at least, and the next two, Brighton and Fulham, actually I would say have at least two difficult games. So Brighton have Wolves this week, obviously, then Liverpool and Tottenham last two games of the season. I think it's going to be really difficult for Brighton to get into European football this year. As much as those two teams are really on the beach, obviously Liverpool already champions. We saw them slip up against Chelsea last week, and Tottenham couldn't care less about the Premier League this year, it seems. And assuming they win tonight against Bodo Glimt or just avoid, I believe, a 3-goal defeat, then they'll be in a European final despite potentially finishing this season in 17th. So it's going to be difficult for Brighton. They might have favourability of those teams being beat, but I think it'll be too difficult of a task for them to get into the Europa Conference League this year. And finally, Fulham on 51 points have Everton, Brentford, and then Man City. So even if they get through next week against Brentford with a win, they then have to play Man City in the last game of the season. So it feels like those last two teams will likely be out of it, and it will more than likely be between Bournemouth and Brentford, which I would love. Like I say, this could be really close. I don't think it's as easy to call this as it is to call the Champions League race at the moment, which we'll get on to after the first break. But if I had to pick one looking at these games, I think it would be Brentford. Ipswich should be a relatively easy win. I can see them semi-comfortably beating Fulham. I'll just check if that game is at home or away. And then they have Wolves on the last day. And you'd think that as good as Wolves have been playing, their foot will be off the gas, especially in the last game of the season. So just checking, yeah, Brentford are at home against Fulham as well. You've got to think Brentford at 3 p.m. on a Saturday as well at the G-Tech It's when they thrive, as much as people like to joke about it. And then last day of the season away to Wolves, which is probably their hardest game potentially with the form Wolves are in. Yeah, it all comes down to next week for Brentford and Fulham, especially Brentford, because like I say, Fulham play City last game of the season. So I'm going to go with Brentford for getting that 8th place in the end. And for me, as long as it's one of Bournemouth and Brentford, I'll be very happy for those teams. I called Bournemouth doing well and they would get European football, but I think that the fixtures aren't helping them with Villa and Man City in these last few games. So it's the most interesting thing happening this Saturday in terms of the Saturday games. The only other game is Southampton against Man City, which we will get onto after we hear a bit about Bioniq.
Your body is unique. And Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bioniq, the world's most personalised supplements. Bioniq provide 100% tailor-made supplements designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right levels to optimise your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bioniq. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now.
So the other game on Saturday, like I just said, is Southampton against Manchester City, 20th versus 3rd. If City win, they go joint 2nd with Arsenal before they play Liverpool late on the Sunday. And although Man City can't officially confirm Champions League football, it will more than likely be confirmed with the other games going on should they win against Southampton, which you could more or less give them the 3 points now after all Southampton have done this season. Then on Sunday, in the other games that are pivotal for the Champions League, you've got Newcastle versus Chelsea, 4th versus 5th. The biggest game this weekend, I think. It's a 12 p.m. on a Sunday, if you are not already aware of that, because of Chelsea obviously playing tonight against Showdown, however it's said, the Swedish club in the Europa Conference League. So you'd imagine they'll win that. I assume they'll have gone for a rotated team. I should say we're recording before the European games. No one on the team was available for a reaction to those games, unfortunately. So, but I think we can assume Manchester United, Spurs, and Chelsea will have all gone through to the finals in their respective tournaments. So going back to this game, obviously Newcastle versus Chelsea, biggest game of the weekend. Forest play Leicester, and on the Saturday, obviously already talked a bit about it, Bournemouth against Villa. So Champions League race, I think, like I was saying, a bit easier to call than the Europa Conference League race. You've got City on 64 points, Newcastle on 63, Chelsea on 63, Forest on 61, and Aston Villa on 60. You may ask, why am I leaving Arsenal out of this? As bad as we've been, as beached as we have been for months, I think it's more or less done. Obviously, play Liverpool this weekend, Newcastle the week after, but our last game of the season is against Southampton, and although our record away at St Mary's is worse than, like, Southampton actually have a winning record against Arsenal at St Mary's. So, but as bad as that is, Arsenal will beat Southampton final day. I don't have any worries about that. And I think the teams behind Arsenal will slip up more than Arsenal slip-ups will cost them. So even if Arsenal lose this weekend, lose next weekend to Newcastle, I don't think it will impact Arsenal getting Champions League football. It will just cost Arsenal second place, which we can have a conversation about on another episode with more people, because for me it isn't that much of an issue based on not having a striker for 4 months. So it's more impressive that Arsenal have stayed second. But going back to the Champions League race, City against Southampton, you would think is just a free win as much as it can be for Manchester City, and they will move to 67 points. Newcastle, Chelsea, obviously the big game. I'll quickly look at Nottingham Forest because I think, again, that should be a free win for Forest against Leicester, which would move them to 64 points above either Newcastle or Chelsea, who play just before them on Sunday afternoon. And then Villa, who play late Saturday against Bournemouth. I think it will be very difficult for Villa to get Champions League football, but a win on Saturday against Bournemouth, and then they have Tottenham and Manchester United, who you'd imagine both will be relatively rotated to try and keep players sharp, but at the same time rested for the Europa League game, which is all both of their seasons rest upon now. So I kind of leaving Villa out of this a bit, as much as the games may favour them. I think is quite a tall task for them to get into the Champions League without winning all three of these games, which they're capable of, but I just think the teams above them will do enough to keep them out of it. Newcastle versus Chelsea then. Chelsea seem to have found form, which has almost come a bit of a shock. It seemed like they were, as soon as they'd acknowledged they didn't want to be in the title race, it felt like they fell off, and they've just seemed to slowly find their form in these last few weeks. They obviously beat Liverpool last week 3-1, and then previous week beat Everton 1-0, beat Fulham 2-1 the week before that, a 2-2 draw with Ipswich, so they haven't beaten Ipswich this season, I believe, a 0-0 draw with Brentford, and then a 1-0 win against Spurs the week before that. So they'll take a lot of confidence, I think, from last week against Liverpool, as much as Liverpool I don't think were good last week. I don't think they particularly cared, which people can take that however they want. They've already won the league, so they've got nothing else to play for. So I think an on-it Liverpool team almost certainly beats Chelsea, but I think that could just give Chelsea enough confidence going into this away game against Newcastle. But for me, Newcastle, they need to be firing. I think at times their front line just hasn't clicked, but especially in this second half of the season, they've been clicking. Jacob Murphy has been unbelievable. I think he's in danger of becoming that guy who's like, oh, he's so underrated, and then everyone's saying that, and they become almost overrated. But he's been doing what is needed of him on that right wing, so I would back Newcastle to win this game, especially because they're at home. I think them being at home gives them the edge in this. Their draw last week against Brighton is just a bit of a Newcastle thing. It feels like Brighton just match up well against Newcastle, because I believe there was a similar result in the away game, and Brighton may have even won, if I can find that. I'm fairly sure Brighton won. Yeah, Brighton beat them 1-0 at St James's. So I just think that's just a matchup thing. Looking at these final three games for each team then, City play obviously Southampton, and then Bournemouth, and then Fulham. So City have a massive say on the Conference League race, weirdly enough. And I would say that they're locked in for Champions League for me. Despite how bad their season has been, they spent 180 million in January, and it has bailed them out enough to get Champions League football still. And they might still leave this season with a trophy, which is possibly the most Man City thing possible. That no matter how bad they have been, they will still leave with silverware, which is painful as an Arsenal fan who we've been doing so well in the past few years, and we can't win anything. Well, you look at City and they're going to win again. For me, City are locked in, much like Arsenal, much like obviously Liverpool are locked in Champions League already. So I think those top 3 places are secured already. Newcastle have Chelsea this week, Arsenal, and then Everton. Obviously, we know how well Newcastle match up with Arsenal. They almost are the only team who can physically go toe-to-toe with Arsenal. I think City as well are probably the only other team that physically are able of going toe-to-toe with Arsenal, when it's Newcastle who overpower Arsenal, if anything. It's Arsenal's last home game of the season, which could mean something. I don't think it necessarily will. From an Arsenal perspective, we look incredibly tired, and I think we've had our last big game, so to say, this week, getting knocked out by PSG in the Champions League. So I don't even know really what to expect, what lineups to expect in these last few games. Will Waneri get more minutes? Will Marino not have to play up front as good as he's been up there for us? I think Newcastle will win that, and then Everton final day, which is at St James's Park. For me, Newcastle are also locked in, so that would be everyone else chasing 5th place, and Chelsea, who are on the same amount of points at the moment as Newcastle, and I think will be 3 points behind them after this weekend, then have to play Man United, who are, like we've already said, they've got nothing to play for. So that you'd imagine Chelsea win that. As weird as Chelsea versus United games seem to always be, they always seem to draw as well. I'd expect Chelsea to go and win against Man United. And then final game of the season, Chelsea against Nottingham Forest at Nottingham Forest, I think will decide the last place, as Forest, who are on 61, play Leicester and West Ham, which you'd imagine is 6 points. Both teams have been terrible this season. And then obviously playing Chelsea on the last day of the season. And for me, I think Forest beat Chelsea on the last day of the season and take it away from Chelsea, who will once again not play Champions League football. Whether that would have impacts on someone like Cole Palmer staying at the club, I highly doubt it at the moment. As much as he is deserving of playing Champions League football, even though he's not really had a great season this year compared to the standards he set last year, you've got to think his eyes will start to turn a little bit. Finally, Villa, who played Bournemouth, Tottenham and Man United, I think I've already said, I think they need 9 points from these last 3 games to even be within a chance. With me also saying Forest will get 9 points and Newcastle and City already being locked in for me, I think it would be too much of a task for Villa, and I don't think it's even guaranteed they can get 9 points from this with how well Bournemouth have been playing. Even with the slip-ups towards the tail end of this season, they've won 4 of that out of their last 5. Have Aston Villa, they're on form to get those 9 points, but I just think that game against Bournemouth this weekend is pivotal before what should be easier games against Tottenham and Man United. So I'll just go over that again. I think for me it's City, Newcastle and Forest. Let us know who you guys think will get those 3 Champions League places, or if you think it will be 4 and Arsenal might drop out of, for even though we've been in second all season. I'm going to hear a little bit about Zencastr and then cover the other games that aren't as interesting, which includes Liverpool against Arsenal.
Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time. Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out as the clear winner, with 4K video recording from your phone, AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs. It's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the description to learn more about Zencastr.
So the other games this weekend, I'll quickly touch on. United, who are in 15th, play West Ham in 17th. Spurs in 16th play Palace, who are 12th. All of these teams have nothing to play for. 3 of them have eyes on a final, and West Ham have been arguably the worst team in the league with the amount of resources they've put into this year, the reputation of some of their players. If it wasn't for Jared Bowen, they would arguably be going down for me. They are so lucky that the promoted teams at the moment are struggling so much to be able to even compete with Premier League sides. Otherwise, they would have been gone this year. They're going to need a massive summer next year. Even though they spent lots of money last year, and I believe I saw a report a few weeks ago, they're going to have to sell to even have money to spend. And you struggle to see the players in this squad that will sell for lots of money. Kudus is probably the big one, who I don't think has reached the standards he set for last year. Paquetá obviously has the betting stuff overhanging him, and I still don't think we have an answer to what's going to happen with that. So, and obviously Bowen's on a really long contract. And he has said when he signed that contract, he does not want to leave. He wants to retire at West Ham. So he's not one up for sale. So it's really difficult to see where this team earns money outside of Kudus, really. I mean, they need some pace, especially in midfield. Their entire midfield is slow. And you can't have that in the Premier League anymore. I was hoping for Evan Ferguson's loan to sort of reignite that hope and belief in him. But I mean, I don't think he's not even really played much. Graham Potter hasn't he's just not shown much since joining there, and I think he gets a handful of months next year after this summer window to really prove himself, or he's gone. And I mean, you wonder what that does for his dwindling reputation already. From a Man United perspective, Amram said they're going to play youngsters in the Premier League until the end of the season, pretty much. I think especially this weekend, so maybe it's a chance for West Ham to get some points. But if I was to guess, I think it will be United sort of scraping a win or a quite boring draw. And this game, I believe, isn't televised, and I don't think people will want to watch it regardless if they aren't fans of either clubs. Looking to the other game, Spurs in 16th against Palace. I think for both of these teams, it's just avoiding injuries for their cup finals, assuming Spurs make it, obviously. I think Palace will probably win this. I just think they don't have the rotation options. I don't think they will rotate as much either because they haven't had to play midweek. So I'd imagine Palace will win this game, but ultimately it doesn't mean anything for either of these teams. And we'll move on to the more important of the least important games, shall we say. It's Liverpool, who are already champions, against Arsenal, who are trying to stay second for a third year in a row, which is a bit of a weird thing to say. It's almost beach versus beach, but at the same time, I think it'll be two teams caring a lot more than they're willing to show, because I think both teams want to prove that they have been the better team this season. And obviously Liverpool have been. But I think from an Arsenal perspective, it will be wanting to sort of put a marker down for next season. In my opinion, we were better than them when in the reverse fixture, and if it wasn't for injuries to Gabriel in the back line, Miles Lewis-Skelly had one of his first games. It might have even been his debut in that reverse fixture. And we had an awful back line when Liverpool went and equalised. I think in general we completely outplayed Liverpool in that game. This is a completely different Arsenal team though. There are so many injuries. There is so much fatigue, especially we saw it in the second half, I think, against PSG, where the legs were going. I think a bit of mental fatigue as well, because this has been such a long and draining season for Arsenal. And there's the thing of the Guard of Honour. To me, it doesn't really mean anything. It mattered for Van Persie, which is like, because obviously he left and went and won instantly against a team that is more of a rival than Liverpool and Arsenal are, in my opinion, as much as online it may seem very different. I don't think when you go outside and actually speak between Arsenal and Liverpool fans, I think of the big six clubs, as much as that's not a lovely term to say, the big six, the greedy six who tried to jump to the Super League, I think these Liverpool, almost, especially before this season, were the closest team in terms of like, we didn't really have any problems with each other between Liverpool and Arsenal. So I think it's more of an online thing. But actually, looking at this game, I think Liverpool will probably win it. I just don't think Arsenal have enough in us at the moment to go and win this. I think a win against Newcastle next week is more important and we'll be more rested for that. So it will be... I hope there's no nonsense. I hope we don't get battered and it's a close game that you kind of just see the faults again, which we keep seeing, which is there is no striker, there is no help for Bukayo Saka in that front line. Ødegaard's not had a good season, which it could be down to the injury he sustained. There's some reports that say that, but for me, at some point, you have to stand up, and we've had players play through injury so often. There's been Ben White who has played through injury so much and put in really strong performances, but our captain hasn't led by example for a large part of this season. From a Liverpool point of view, like I was already really saying, this feels like this is why we were champions. This is why we were better than you this season to Arsenal. So as bad as they were last week, I think we will see them be much better this week and get another win, most likely. So, yeah, long season from an Arsenal perspective. I might quickly touch on midweek. Obviously, we had one of the guys from the Arsenal podcast join after the game yesterday, recording this on Thursday. It's just so, like I was already saying, it's so draining this season. I don't think we were good enough to win that tie, but I don't think we were completely outclassed like we have been in years gone by in the Champions League. We were completely in that tie. It was far closer than even a 3-1. It was just, that home tie has to go better. If we'd started like we did in that second leg at home, the crowd would have been going, and you think the momentum would have stayed with Arsenal quite easily, especially in the first half, and maybe we go to Paris with a lead. But in the end, it's glaring issues up front. Saka putting crosses in time and time again across not even just this tie. We saw it in the first leg of the Real Madrid game and countless other games across the season where he puts crosses in and there is no striker there. We've seen a bit more from Martinelli in the past month or so, but for me, he's just not of the standard we need for going and winning a Premier League, a Champions League. So it feels like one of the biggest summers in my lifetime. I'm 22, so that'll put it in a time frame for those of you listening. And it's a bit make or break for Arteta next season, I think. Context permitting, I remember speaking to Juptage about this in probably October, November, when I had first joined the podcast. Like, how long does Arteta have to win something? And it really feels more make and break than ever next year. We don't know how good Man City will be with Rodri back, and no doubt lots of money put into their team again, because as they go through a transition that will be easier for them just because they have that backing from the UAE. Liverpool, I don't think we really know what to expect from them either. We don't, because Slot has done this with just Chiesa joining them, and as much as Trent's going to leave, that will be a massive blow. Salah will be older, but that never seems to affect him. Van Dijk again will be older, and once again, it doesn't seem to affect him. So, it won't be as big of a shock how they play and how good they are. I think they will face much lower blocks, which could cause them issues. And as an Arsenal fan, we saw the same thing after 22-23, where it was a surprise we were so good. And the next year we were playing lower blocks and it was much harder. And I think Liverpool will experience that a bit. It's not like they were bad in the years before, but it's a new manager and teams didn't know what to expect as much as they will next year, and they'll be more prepared for the problems that they cause. So it'll be interesting to see what Liverpool are up to. But from an Arsenal perspective, if we have a season where we aren't plagued with injuries and we reach 90 points, then whether that's enough to win the title or not. If he wins the title, obviously Arteta stays. If he doesn't win it at around 90 points with seemingly no glaring injury issues, I think there will be a decent amount of the fan base who want a new face. And it's so difficult to say if I'll be in that group, having not experienced what happens next season yet, which is part of the problem of looking into the future with football. I couldn't have expected how this season has gone. I had a weird feeling because Liverpool experienced in their third season pushing, where they just had loads of injuries. But for them, they had already won the league in that second season. We haven't won it yet. And I'm hoping that players will be back next year. Saka will be able to play all season. Maybe Ødegaard gets surgery, which has been talked about, and he's back to how he was before this season. And hope there has to be a striker. For me, there has to be a left winger. Zubimendi is all but confirmed, and hopefully I never have to watch that guy playing in defensive midfield again. Yeah, it's make or break for Arsenal next year, and I think that's where we'll leave it. I think at the end of the season we'll go through a lot of teams and speak about how their season has been and what they need for next year. So I thought I'd give my perspective in a podcast that has gone far longer than I was expecting it to go, as we reach 39 minutes. So I'll leave you going into this weekend for those big games, for a Europa Conference League race and a Champions League race. So enjoy this weekend's football, as much as a lot of games don't matter for a lot of teams. If games do matter for you, I hope they go well, unless you're a Spurs fan or a club that is a rival of Arsenal, let's say. I've been Nick. This has been the GSPN Daily English Premier League podcast, and enjoy your weekend's football.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.